start.
Okay, to wash the celery, typically at school we would dip this in our sanitizer. Since I don't have that set up here at home, we're going to run water in and out of the rib of the celery and then rub our fingers up and down to remove any dirt that would be on the celery. For the carrots, we're going to do the same thing. We would normally dip it in our sanitizer and then rub the carrot to remove any dirt or debris that's on the outside. Just as a reminder, if your vegetables or fruits are in sanitizer, it should be cold sanitizer, and it should have a contact time of 1 minute to kill any of the bacteria. For the parsley, again, we would dip it in our cold sanitizer at school, but here I'm just going to run cold water over the leaves of parsley, and then give it a good shake to remove the liquid. And then for the green onions or scallions, we're just going to rub the dirt or debris off of the scallions. As well. And then if there's any parts of the scallion that don't look really very good, you can peel that off of the outside of the scallion and then get rid of that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. So what we have here is the beginning of my mise en place for rice pilaf. We've washed our celery, our carrots, parsley, green onions or scallions. I have 3 tablespoons of butter, 1 cup of rice, long grain white rice is what I'm using here. And then we have 2 cups of beef broth or beef bouillon. The way that we typically make this at school is we have what we call beef base. And so it's a paste that you mix with water. You have to check the directions on the specific kind that you have, but most of the time the ratio is 1 teaspoon of the paste per cup of water. And then, so like for example, with this recipe, we need 2 cups of beef broth. I use 2 teaspoons of the beef bouillon paste and 2 cups of water. And then you just mix that together and that makes 2 cups of beef broth. Okay, so we're going to prepare the green onions or scallions, and the recipe says that we need 1/4 of a cup of green onions sliced thin. Just as a reminder, I am making a full recipe of this, but typically in class we cut this recipe in half. So whatever ingredient amounts I say, just know that we typically cut those amounts in half. All right, so to start off, we want to cut off the root end, and I want to try and be as efficient as possible. So I'm going to put 4 green onions together and chop them or slice them at the same time. So I've got my compost bucket over here so I can get rid of my waste quickly and easily. And you know, I could cut this on a bias and try to be fancy, but honestly, these are going to be cooked in rice. So they're going to lose their shape. So it's really not worth it to cut them on the bias because they're gonna get soft and you won't be able to see that bias cut shape. So we're just gonna go very simple and cut these nice and thinly. And then when I get to the end, of course, I just throw away the end pieces. And then we're just gonna measure into our 1/4 of a cup measuring cup to make sure that we have the correct amount. Oh, and we've got plenty. We've got plenty. Some recipes call for the white part of the green onion or the scallion. Some recipes call for the green part. For this recipe, I just use all of the parts together. Okay, so I'm just gonna put this over here as part of our mise en place so we can have it ready to go when we are ready to assemble the rice. Okay? Okay, so in order to prepare the celery, the recipe calls for 1/3 of a cup of celery brunoise. That means it's going to be 1/8 of an inch by 1/8 of an inch. So we've got a very small cut to make. Again, in order to be efficient, I'm gonna put all the celery together. I'm gonna cut off these white ends that tend to have a little bit of dark coloring on them, and they're a little bit woody in texture. So we just get rid of the the white ends. I'm also, for the purposes of cutting brunoise, I'm going to get rid of these leafy parts that are up at the top. And again, trying to be efficient, I'm gonna line these up where the leafy parts are all together so that I can cut that off together. These pieces of celery are something that you shouldn't waste. You should use them for something. They're good in soups. You could go back in here and cut some of these larger pieces, but this is not something that you should waste. It's something that you should save, set aside, and use again. Now, for the brunoise part of the celery, the challenge here is that celery is kind of U-shaped and brunoise is a square. And so our brunoise, we want them to be very close in size, but they're not going to be perfect. So what I'm going to do is use a paring knife. You could use your chef's knife if you wanted to, but I'm going to use a paring knife just because I can be a little bit more precise with the cuts that I make. And so I'm going to make long sticks that are 1/8 of an inch wide, and then I'm going to stack all those sticks together and cut them 1/8 of an inch the opposite direction so that I have 1/8 of an inch cubes. The challenge when you're cutting all of these cuts is perfection versus the amount of time that you have to spend. A lot of times in the kitchen, you want to try and be as efficient and as quick as possible. And a lot of these cuts, they require you to practice a lot before you can get really good at making these cuts quickly. And again, like I said, the challenge here is that celery is kind of U-shaped. So I'm going to try and be as close to 1/8 of an inch as I can here, but sometimes that's a little more challenging than you think. Okay, so now that we've got a few pieces here that are pretty close to 1/8 of an inch wide, I'm going to switch knives over to my chef's knife. And then I'm going to go 1/8 of an inch in the opposite direction. And again, to save time, I'm stacking multiple pieces together so that I can save time. Now I am trying to be close to 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to try and be a little bit cautious and careful as I cut these pieces. You can see here, this is really what we're going for. Not like complete perfection, but most of the pieces are very close to 1/8 of an inch by 1/8 of an inch. Okay. Okay, so now my daughter, Corinne, say hi.
Hi.
She is going to cut some celery brunoise here. Now, Corinne is a 7-year-old chef, so she's learning to make her cuts. And she's learning how to hold her knife. But she's trying her hardest to make these cuts really, really tiny, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And also, when you're beginning, it's harder to put multiple pieces together. So Corinne is doing one piece of celery at a time. But like I talked about before, you can save time by putting multiple pieces together. Be a little more efficient. Okay, you can add those to the cup so that we can try to get a full 1/3 cup.
Okay.
right, so now my son Cameron is gonna give it a shot to make Brunoise celery. Cameron is a 10-year-old chef, so again, he's still learning too. But he is a little easier able to cut multiple pieces together. Just a suggestion, Cameron, you might want to go even a little bit smaller. Brunoise, 1/8 of an inch is pretty tiny.
I can see it's very tiny. I can't put it in one cup.
Okay. All right.
I'll just...
Okay, so the next thing to do is to brunoise the carrots. We're going to do the same kind of technique that we did for the celery. One thing that sometimes you do to carrots is you peel them. These carrots look really, really good on the outside, but sometimes carrots don't look so great on the outside, so you would want to peel them. Basically, you just take a peeler and you just peel off that very outer layer of skin. It doesn't take much to get the job done because it's just that tiny little outer layer of skin. But like I said, these carrots don't look bad at all, so I will probably not peel the rest of the carrots. Now, of course, you want to get the ends cut off. Put those in your compost bucket. And then the difficult thing about a carrot is that you've got this thicker part and then a thinner part. So I'm going to divide the carrot kind of where it starts to get really thin. And then I'm going to use the bigger part to start out with here. You want to square up your carrot. And so we're going to make a flat side. And then you can set that down on the board so that your carrot doesn't roll around. And then you do the other sides the exact same way. You just keep turning the carrot as you go. Now, from here, we're going to cut what I call planks. You do not want to, you want to try and be as efficient as possible. So you don't want to try to cut like this direction in 1/8 of an inch pieces. You want to make the longest pieces possible to start off with and then cut them down from there. So I'm going to put my knife on about the 1/8 inch mark. And I'm going to do my very best to get this as even as possible all the way across that. Now that's what I call a plank. That's a 1/8 inch thick plank. And I'm just going to continue that until I run out of carrot. Again, just as a reminder, we're doing brunoise, and brunoise is 1/8 of an inch by 1/8 of an inch. So it's a very small cut. Now here at the end, we want to be really controlled with our knife cuts. Make sure that you're going as slow as possible because you don't have a lot of stability. This little piece I'm going to put over here to the side. So now I've got all these planks that are 1/8 of an inch in width. And so now I'm going to cut these into sticks. Now you kind of have to figure out what works best for you. Sometimes that stack that's really tall is harder to cut through. So I might just stack up 2. And then cut at the 1/8 inch mark and continue all the way across until I run out of carrot. And actually these 2 carrots are kind of funky shaped, so I'm going to do them separately just so I can try to be a little bit more accurate with my brunoise. Okay, so once I have all of these sticks together that are 1/8 of an inch, now I can stack them together and go 1/8 of an inch in the other direction. And again, this makes me really efficient and it helps me to be as quick as possible. Now, holding these little guys together can be a bit of a challenge, so you want to try and be as careful with your knife as you can be so that you don't cut your fingers. Like I said, it's kind of a game between being efficient, cutting a lot at the same time, and being perfect about getting a 1/8 inch cut. That's pretty darn good right there. Okay. Okay. So Cameron is going to try his hand at cutting the rest of these carrots into brunoise. He's going to try and do a whole giant stack of these sticks at one time. He's not going to be as accurate as he would be if he did smaller stacks at a time. But we're just trying to have a little fun here.
And those carrots that he's cutting are the ones we took off when we were squaring the carrot. And
Yep, so we don't want to waste the pieces that we squared off. We can use those for something else. If you need your carrots to be perfectly square brunoise, you can use just the middle part. But if you are, you know, making soup or stock or something like that, you can use the squared off pieces for that. Cameron also thought it was interesting too. Carrots have a pigment in them called carotenoids, which give them their orange or deep yellow pigment. You can kind of see it on my hands here from when I was cutting the carrots. But if you cut carrots very long, they will turn your hands kind of an orange color because of their carotenoid pigment. It's called beta carotene, and it's a vitamin A compound. And so it just gives carrots their distinct orange, deep yellow color. Okay, that's good. So for the parsley, you're basically going to want to try and take the leaves off of the bigger stems. And it's kind of a tedious process. So again, it depends on how much time you have to do this. But a lot of times you're able to kind of pull your fingers down the parsley and take off most of what you need. And then kind of go back and get some of the woodier stems out of there. You don't have to be completely perfect about it, but you do want to try and get most of those big stems because they don't have a great texture. So we need 2 tablespoons of parsley. So I'm going to kind of try to eyeball what we've got going on here. All right, so then basically we're just going to kind of rock and chop over the top of what we've got here until we start to get it to be a little bit smaller. Bring it back together.
And with practice, you can cut faster.
Yep. When you're a beginner, you have to go a little bit slower, but as you get better, you can go a little faster. And on our recipe, it says 2 tablespoons of parsley chopped fine. So we're gonna go fairly small with this parsley.
You can smell it.
Yes, it has a very fresh smell, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's getting tinier.
Yep.
It kind of clears your sinuses.
Yeah. Because of the
Not like horseradish or wasabi does.
Definitely not.
All right, now I'd say we're getting close to where we want to be. Now, I'm just going to do this because we kind of practice this in our garnishes unit, how you dry parsley. We do not need to be able to sprinkle this parsley, but for some purposes, it's nice to be able to sprinkle parsley. And when it's wet, even if you shook the water out of it when you dried it, just by cutting it, you bring all of that moisture out of the parsley, and so it wants to stick together. And so it doesn't sprinkle very nicely. So what we're gonna do is put it inside of a paper towel and then kind of wring it out, basically.
And maybe squeeze it a little.
Yep, I'll show you how to do that here in just a second. And honestly, parsley like destroys your board for everything else. So you have to give your board a wash or a rinse after you're done. Okay, so I'm basically just gonna put the parsley in here and then squeeze it. You can see how much liquid comes out of the parsley. And then from there, it should be nice and dry. And again, depending on what you're doing with it, then you should be able to sprinkle it once it's dry. For this purpose, for the rice pilaf, we don't need to be able to sprinkle it, but again, I just kind of showed you what to do there. We need 2 tablespoons of the parsley. So we'll measure that out and put that on our plate with all the rest of our mise en place. Okay.
I'm unwrapping the butter, and what my mom always does is uses the extra butter on there. If there's extra butter,
To grease the pan.
to grease the pan.
Yep, so we save those little butter wrappers and we can use them to grease like a sheet pan or a cake pan or something like that in the future. We just keep them in a Ziploc bag in our fridge. But if you notice the amounts being different from the recipe here, we are actually making this for our supper tonight. So I'm actually doubling the recipe, and most of the time in school we cut the recipe in half. So the original recipe says 3 tablespoons of butter. Corinne is actually putting in 6 tablespoons of butter here because we're making it for our family for supper. So the idea here is that we're gonna let the butter or margarine melt. We're using butter in this case. And then we're going to put the rice into the butter and then brown up the rice. Okay. Okay, so now that the butter has melted, we're going to add the rice in. And again, the original recipe calls for 1 cup of rice. We're making this for our supper tonight, so we're actually adding 2 cups of rice. Okay, and then, so Corinne is going to stir this rice. And really the idea here is to coat the rice with the fat. And the purpose of that is to help the rice grains stay more separate when you cook them together in the rice pilaf. Also, it adds flavor, of course, and we're going to also look for some slight browning in this rice, which adds a nutty flavor as well. You got to be really careful though. You do not want to brown it too much, because if you've ever heard of puffed rice or like Rice Krispies, for example, if you go too far, your rice will start to puff, and that's not the texture that we want in the rice pilaf. And so we're going to go until we just get a really light brown color. Your nose will know. You will start to smell that nutty flavor kind of developing, that nutty smell as the rice starts to brown.
And so, like, this is kind of dry rice. I want to, like, so if I take a scoop, this is already, like, buttery.
All the kernels of the rice are coated with the butter.
But
I see some over here that's not coated with the butter.
I'm just going to flip it around, and then it'll just get some butter on it.
Yep, and you want to be careful not to scoop it out of the pan though, okay?
Because that'll mean you'll have less than 2 cups. Or 1 cup, if we're doing the recipe. Or if you were doing the recipe at school.
Okay, here, can I show you? Okay, let me see. So, go this way, around the edge of the pan. And as this heats up a little bit, you'll start to see the rice will start to sizzle a little bit in that butter, and that's a good thing. That's kind of what you want to see. You can hear it if you listen carefully. And this is definitely something that you don't want to walk away from. You want to babysit this the entire time that you're cooking it, because if you walk away, this could burn or brown way too much in a very, very short amount of time. So it's definitely something you want to keep stirring constantly.
So we're going to try to coat it with as many coats of butter as we can.
Really close to the place where I'm going to have Corinne take this off of the stovetop. You can tell by looking really closely that there are a few little kernels in here that are getting kind of brown, and we can smell it. Like I said, our nose knows, and my kids think that this smells a lot like popcorn, which is probably true because popcorn and rice are both grains, and so they're very similar.
And the smell is so good. It makes you just want to eat it right now. But you have to wait until it's ready. And if you don't have like the spatula
The rubber scraper?
hold, no, like the spatula hold, like how you hold it, like you can't really stir it. So you have to find your way how you hold the spatula, or else you can't just like stir it that good because, and then it'll start to get brown, and then will turn black if you leave it. If you do.
Okay, so we're getting very, very close here. We can see a lot more granules are getting golden brown. We're gonna stop here in the next probably 20 or 30 seconds. And then I might, just for the fun of it, let a couple of them puff so that you guys can see what it looks like. It is important to keep it moving around the pan so that the bottom parts don't burn and the top parts then aren't cooked. Careful, careful.
And you don't want to stir it like too much on the edge because then it comes up to the top, and then some greens might fall out.
And when it burns, it's so hard to get off of the.
Okay, I think we're ready. Here, Corinne, I'm gonna.
And then already we're trying our best to make the rice grains not fall out of the pan. But
Okay, watch out.
Looks like Rice Krispies.
Okay, put them in here and we'll see if we can watch these last few get a little bit puffed. We'll see if they'll do it. I don't know if I've got enough butter in here or not. Just for fun.
yeah, and it's just a little.
Got some smoking going on there, so I'm gonna turn that down a little bit.
So our smoke alarm doesn't go out.
Yeah.
Don't want that to
Or we
happen.
can turn on the fan.
But one time
Yes.
that did happen. The smoke alarm went off. So that was
Turn
crazy.
it down even a little bit more here. It's getting a little smoky.
So they're getting browned.
They're definitely getting brown. And I don't know if I have enough butter in them for them to actually puff or not. We'll see.
So some grains are starting to get a little puffed. I'm gonna try to like pile up the butter that's left. I don't know if I'll make it.
I don't think we have enough butter in there to make them puff. Ah, well. Our experiment was fun, but I'm not sure that it's really going to work. I don't think we have enough butter in there to make them puff. We'll give it just a little bit longer here, but I don't really want that burned rice smell in my house either.
It smells good.
Ugh.
It smells like popcorn.
Maybe we can get more.
No, let's not do more butter. Not right now.
Well, they're starting to get brown almost.
I don't think they're gonna puff.
I think we need more butter. All right, shut the video off. Okay, so at school, we would put our rice in a greased loaf pan, like a bread pan, just because we need something that's a little bit smaller. I'm making a larger amount here, so I have it in a 9x13 cake pan. But you pour the rice into the greased bread pan, in your case, cake pan here, and then you add in your beef stock. Okay, so we have put the rice in a greased pan. We've added the beef broth, and now we're going to put foil on the top. We're gonna seal it on, absorbs into the rice as much as possible and doesn't evaporate out. We're gonna put this in a 325-degree convection oven or a 350-degree conventional oven for 15 minutes.
But to make more of the beef sauce, we did rinse it out with the sink over there, and then we dumped more of it in.
Yeah, because we're making a larger amount. We're trying not to confuse you, but I think we are going to end up confusing you a little bit. Okay, so we just had this rice in my conventional oven at 350 degrees for 15 minutes. Reminder, at school, since we have a convection oven that has a fan in the back, we reduce the temperature by 25 degrees. Your recipe does say 325 degrees convection. So get it nice and tightly covered with foil in order to keep in as much of that water as possible so that the rice absorbs the water. Corinne, you can go ahead and give it a little stir here. We don't expect the rice to be fully cooked at this point. It's only cooked for 15 minutes in the oven. And at this point, we're gonna add in our thinly sliced green onions or scallions, our brunoise celery, brunoise carrots, and our finely chopped parsley. So I'm gonna go ahead and dump these in, Corinne, and then you can continue to stir.
Okay.
Okay, and you really just wanna get them mixed in really well.
If you smell it, it smells like popcorn so much.
I smell the beef broth right now.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, the beef broth and popcorn mixed together. Ow.
Oh,
Burn
did you
myself.
touch the pan? Okay, be very, very, very careful. Just a second. Are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay, keep stirring, and then remember this pan is really hot.
Mm-hmm. Just came out of an oven.
Yes, it did. Okay, so we're just gonna mix the vegetables into what we've got here. And then the foil goes back on the top, nice and tight again. And then we go back into the oven for 10 or 15 minutes until the rice is tender. So whatever it takes to get the rice to be tender. One thing to remember at school, if we can, we want to try and minimize the amount of times that we open up the oven door, because every time we do that, it cools off the oven and things don't get cooked as quickly. So if we could try to take everybody's out at the same time, that would be the best. We can test. If you're done, you can stay out, and if you're not done, then you can go back in for a similar amount of time as the other people that are going back in. Okay. We probably, do you think it's stirred up?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna put the foil on. And remember, the pan is hot, so we gotta be really careful putting the foil back on. We're gonna try and make it nice and tight again so that all that liquid gets absorbed into the rice and doesn't evaporate off. Okay, going back into the oven for 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, so the rice has been in the oven for 15 minutes a second time. And Corinne, you can go ahead and stir this again. Or just, oh, you know what? Cameron, can you get like video in here? I can tell already that the liquid has not been absorbed by the rice. So we're probably gonna have to go back into the oven again. I am gonna taste it with a spoon just to make sure that it is tender. It's really, really hot. Okay, so hold on. We're not gonna double
Can
dip
you
here.
get some vegetables?
Sure.
You got it. Is it hot?
It's not tender, so we're gonna go back in the oven for a little bit. Okay. Okay, so we're checking it again, just to see if that rice is tender. Okay, now we're gonna look for the good sign. Can you stir it, Corinne, and see if we see any liquid? Ooh, look at that. No liquid is collecting in there, so we're pretty sure that the rice has absorbed all that liquid. It's probably tender.
If you see it, it's really looking
Okay.
good now.
Let's give it a little taste with another clean spoon here.
Can I do it
It's gonna be
first?
very hot.
Yeah, get some vegetables, like carrots and stuff.
Okay.
It's good with vegetables.
Okay, you wanna try it? You gonna tell me if the rice is tender?
It's just so hot.
The rice is tender. Okay. Okay, so you can eat the rest of that. Hold on.
I
Now,
want some.
okay, hang on. I'm gonna get my scooper. Now, okay, please be careful. Our recipe says that we are supposed to portion it with a number 8 scoop. The only scoop that I have at home right now is this scoop. And it is not a number 8. A number 8 is bigger than this one, I believe. But I'm gonna just show you that process. So, oh, no. Just scoop it like that. And then, of course, if you had some parsley or something like that, you could garnish it or even something carrot you could garnish it with as well. Okay. What do you think of the rice pilaf?
It's super good.
It's the best thing ever.
Okay, we had to hustle through that video so these kids could eat because they were starving. Okay.
Seconds.
It's so good.
We ate it in like a couple seconds. And now we're having seconds.
Birds.
Birds.